I think that in your master's work, you talked about the problem of consciousness
Mm.
and what mechanism does conscious does consciousness arise from within a naturalistic worldview? Well, the answer to that is we don't really know. I think that you and I would agree that when it comes to a natural explanation of consciousness, it's kind of up in the air. We're not really sure. There's not some
Hmm.
definite thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I know that you have said that from your biblical worldview, it makes sense that consciousness would be informed by or caused by spirit. That is a part of human nature, is spirit.
Of a naturalistic explanation for consciousness. But then I think you stated it well. If God himself is conscience, immaterial, it would make sense that we would find human beings who can be material and have an immaterial component. So this doesn't prove God exists, but it fits within the Christian worldview or theistic worldview. So you might say it's a negative, there's the lack of a naturalistic explanation, but then there's a positive fit within the theistic worldview. That's why I think it's not an argument from ignorance. Now, of course, if we want to test for consciousness, it's not going to be a physical test through the normal means of science because consciousness would not show up in the way that it would, such as atoms or particles or some other process within nature. It's actually primarily a philosophical question. Although I do think there's some intersection with science when we start looking at near death experiences and what the best explanation in principle could be for near death experiences would point towards a kind of consciousness and continued existence as the best cause. So the kinds of evidences that I will give, and I don't obviously don't want to spend too much time on this, but if near-death experiences are true, and I mean the kind where people are physically dead, come back, tell a story, and have information they could not have had otherwise, then that seems to be a sign that there's at least a minimal continued consciousness when the brain stops working and the heart stops beating. Now, that's a big if. I think there's good evidence for that in certain peer reviewed journals. But that would be one way of testing if consciousness is involved, not just a story about heaven, not about 90 minutes here or 3 minutes in hell, information that could not have been known in that physical state. That would point towards a conscious cause as opposed to a physical cause. I would point towards two other things. One thing like free will, and this is a huge topic. I know some atheists will differ on this. Some will say there is free will, and I've heard one point to like quantum physics explains it, which to me basically means we have no idea where it comes from. I've heard others take an agnostic position. We don't know where free will arises, and others like Sam Harris would take more of a position and deny free will. Well, if there is such a thing as free will, which I would argue is just so basic to being human, then it points towards something not physical because it requires a kind of causation outside of just physical particles in motion, but of kind of rational choice and reflection, which is a mental process in which thoughts and ideas are involved. Hence, a kind of consciousness would be the best explanation for it. One other one I won't go into is even just reflecting on what it means to be human. I won't go into in too much depth. Like, is there a difference between the brain and between the mind? If everything can't be reduced down to the brain, are there things like thoughts and sensations and feelings? Are they real? And they seem irreducible to physical properties and characteristics and seem to point towards a conscious kind of existence for their grounding. So that's a huge topic, but that would be the basic way that I would go addressing hopefully where your question hit.